We are sitting here in one of the oldest democracies in history. Do you really have so little trust in British deliberation?
Comedians are being investigated by the police for jokes they make in their shows.
And as a result of that, people have got very, very angry.
And the person next to you goes, racist! And 2015,
And again,
2016, 2017,
it is frustrating.
2019.
It is frustrating. But I actually missed a couple of points in your conversation with him.
The issue is that the media, a lot of it, has not been doing a good job of adhering to its own values. That's the issue.
You have got, and you may not want to know this, the kids who are younger, they're openly now, Gen Z, are openly talking about what's the point in democracy.
He also said he wanted to change the electoral system of Britain. Is that a good idea? You didn't ask him about it. Hello and welcome to Tell Me More, the first English-speaking show of Germany's newspaper ZEIT. And today I'm in a very special environment because I was hosted to host Francis Foster and Konstantin Kisin, the makers of Triggernometry. Thank you so much, you both, for having me here.
That was a very professional intro, off the cuff.
Yeah.
Fantastic job.
Well, I tried hard. I practiced at home, actually. So, just to start off with, Francis, Konstantin, for the very little number of people outside the Anglosphere who might not know you, tell me who you are, what have been your journeys through life, what led you to be sitting here talking to me?
I mean, there we go. There's an old intro question. So you brought me back to the halcyon days of 2022 there. We no longer do that question. But I guess, who are we? So for myself, I am a comedian, soon-to-be author, podcaster, interviewer. We have a YouTube show. What has been my journey through life? I started off my career as a teacher. I taught in secondary schools, and then I transitioned, shall we just say, to use that word, into being a primary school teacher. So across my career, it was about 12 years teaching in both sectors, teaching in deprived schools, in both outside and inside London. I then became a stand-up comedian. I worked pretty consistently as a stand-up, and then we started this show in 2018 because both Konstantin and I could feel that there was something in the water that wasn't actually being, how can I put it, reflected back at me, for want of a better way of putting it. I could see that there was something happening that the media wasn't prepared to address, or they were addressing it, but they were being disingenuous with it. So from that point on, that's how we started. And it started for us with Brexit because we realised that what was being told about Brexit actually wasn't being honest. They weren't being honest. They were saying everyone who voted for Brexit was stupid, ignorant and a racist. You can't smear 52% of the population with those words. There needs to be something else happening here, something more profound, something more interesting.
Right. We want to talk about this in more depth, about the frustration of many people with established media, and well, me being a representative of established media.
Hopefully
I guess.
not.
Well, we'll see. See to that. But Konstantin, tell us a bit about yourself then.
Well, Francis mentioned quite a big chunk of it already, but I was born in Soviet Russia and lived there for a long time. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and I lived in modern Russia in its early phases, which was a pretty chaotic time. So I was
glad you survived that.
Yeah, well, my parents were one of the lucky ones. But what I learned from those two things is, first of all, I experienced a society that was completely different to the West. And so, number one, I don't take what we have here remotely for granted, unlike most people nowadays, sadly. And also what I experienced is the fact that a very ostensibly stable society, that on the surface you would say, well, this society has been like this for 3 generations, for the entire life of everyone who's alive today, could collapse just like that. So I think it gives me a somewhat different perspective to most people on what's happening. And then my parents sent me to school in England. I was educated here. I went to university here. I never finished my degree because my parents ran out of money to pay for me. So I started my own translation business, and I did that for many, many years. And then, much like Francis, I got bored and started my stand-up career as well. When we started our channel in 2018, it is all based on what we've built here, which is an opportunity to sit down with somebody, whether we agree with them or not, and address the issues that actually matter to people in an honest way. We may not be right, we may not be unbiased, but we are honest, at least, in our pursuit of the truth. We're not sitting here pretending to be something we're not. And I think when we talk about mainstream media, I have many experiences, sadly, of being interviewed by journalists. Not in an environment like this, where you're sitting here and everything's being recorded and people can see for themselves what's been said, but in an environment where, you know, they put a recorder down, they record it, they go away and they write an article, and the article has no resemblance to what was said at all. And I think that's part of the frustration that a lot of people feel, which is why I think new media has been successful, because you may look at our channel and you say, well, these guys' politics is different to mine, but at least you know who we are and where we're coming from, and then you can make your own judgment. That's where I think...
I mean, you've been super successful, to use your words, with the claim of Triggernometry, which, to quote from, is that honesty, integrity and diversity are all increasingly lacking in established media. Konstantin, you have told us about your personal experience. I guess you could name a couple of examples as to why you believe that established media aren't honest. And I would like to ask you to do this, but I'd also like to ask you why you think that is.
Well, it's different for different people, right? In my career, it was quite interesting because I wasn't really propelled to being known. Trigonometry took quite a while. It's not like overnight, like I don't know if you saw this Hawk Tour girl or whatever her name is. She made a crude joke in a video that went viral. Now she's on every big platform in the world. It didn't happen like that. Yeah. We had to work for it. So when I used to go, for example, into the BBC, I wouldn't be going in there like I am now to do one of their flagship programs. I would go in as an unknown comedian stroke commentator to do some late night radio show that nobody listened to, right? And nobody knew who I was particularly, and the people I was working with didn't know who I was really. So they would talk to me without knowing my political views, my opinions, what I challenge, what I'm critical of, etc. And they would look at me on the surface and they would say, well, this guy's he's got a foreign name, looks a bit dark, looks a bit foreign, maybe speaks with a bit of an accent. He's one of us.
He must be a lefty.
He must be a progressive, not even a lefty. We can argue about left and right. He must be, you know, all in on diversity of skin color, not diversity of opinion. He must be on all victimhood. Victimhood is the currency of the modern age, right? So they would say to me, you know, the great thing about this time now is, you know, all these straight white men used to have control. Now it's our turn. And they would say, in terms, diversity, equity, inclusion, we have the power in our hands.
Who
now.
exactly are they? The editors?
It was other panelists, editors, various people that I'd be talking to at the BBC. They don't encounter people with a different mindset. One of the things, you know, Francis mentioned Brexit. One of the things you heard the most from our kind of journalist elite class during that period. By the way, Francis and I both voted against Brexit. We both voted Remain. But this was almost like a thing of pride. They would say, well, I don't know anyone who voted Brexit, as if this was something to be proud of.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if that is your worldview and that's your experience, how are you going to be balanced and objective? It's not possible.
But I mean, there was this kind of shock in 2016. First there was Brexit, then the election of Donald Trump, and a lot of journalists started wondering, you know, what have we missed? Why have we not been able to read the room? And so have you never encountered journalists who were self-critical to that extent?
I think one of the things with being self-critical is that it also, there's a painful element to it, which is you examine your flaws, which is you examining the things that you haven't done well, the mistakes you've made, the errors that you've been part of. And the problem is, most people, I don't think, are willing to be able to do that kind of self-analysis. It's far easier to go, well, look, they're all stupid, ignorant, and wrong.
But then again, I mean, you have a lot of magazines and newspapers in the UK who one would call conservative or right-leaning. You have the Spectator, you have the Telegraph. I mean, you have a thriving conservative market of ideas here. and people who would certainly say that, you know, to resent public opinion is not exactly what journalism should do.
Mm. Well, those two publications exist, you're right. But
GB News.
GB News is a very new organization, but let's just come back to the original thing you said, which was, aren't there journalists who have changed their mind, who've tried to evolve, who've tried to change their worldview?
Yeah, honestly try to explore what was going on. Yeah.
I don't know many of them. What I saw was most of the people who were against Brexit, their argument after Brexit happened was, we must stop Brexit. That was their argument, right? Their argument was, these people voted the wrong way, and what we must now do is explain how wrong they were, and then I don't know what exactly they wanted. They wanted what they called a people's referendum, which was a second referendum, right? So
okay, but you've described what you have experienced, but yes. I asked you for the reasons behind it, because, or let me put it another way. When I walked in here, you know, into Trigger Town, interesting space actually, beautiful. My first impression was that, look, this is what the success of viewpoint diversity looks like. So you guys actually are a good example of what you can do with offering multiple views. And you have close to 1 million subscribers on YouTube, I believe now. You have various outlets, Spotify, elsewhere. So this goes to show that if you really provide viewpoint diversity, you can be economically successful. So why is it that media doesn't take you as an example, or let's say established media, and try to do something similar? You know, if I were a BBC editor, I would have asked you guys if you wanted to have a primetime show in the BBC.
That's why you don't work at the
BBC, yeah.
Because they wouldn't ask people like us.
You never got any calls from them?
No!
What do you, no, anyone who suggested that idea in a BBC planning room would be laughed out of the room.
Yeah, what it shows you, Jochen, is the power of ideology, where the power of ideology trumps responsibility. It trumps effectiveness. It trumps the desire to make money, to make content that people are going to want to watch. Ultimate example of this is Disney. Disney have brought all of this stuff in, and then they've made, I think it's over $1 billion in loss because of all of this stuff, because the ideology is so powerful. Because if your ideology teaches you that in order for you to be pure, moral and virtuous, that you have to behave in these ways, and also if you don't behave in these ways and you don't ascribe to yourself to this creed, you are also run the risk of cancellation, losing your jobs, losing your relationships and your friendships, then you are going to do that, and to hell with the consequences.
That's an interesting point you're raising there, I think. The anxiety to lose your job. I mean, that might be something that we should talk about in more depth when it comes to journalism. You know, when I started with Die Zeit 23 years ago, there was a different world in that the internet was only just emerging. Now, when the internet emerged, it had a couple of well, first economical and then psychological effects on journalism. The first economic consequence was a big loss of advertisement, simply. So it all moved online. And of course, newspapers moved online then too. But what happened was that journalism became a different job. You know, it wasn't economically as secure as it used to be, and it didn't pay so well as it used to. And then at the same time, you started to get attacked for everything you wrote, for everything you said. So, you know, while the economics for and the pays for journalists got more dire, you had to develop a thicker skin. But how can you develop a thicker skin and become, you know, steadfast with your views when at the same time you feel that you're economically insecure? So, I mean, do you agree that this might be behind the ideology that you describe?
I think so, and you know, people always respond to incentives. So if you're going to incentivize a certain type of behavior, then absolutely. Plus, as well, the model is changing. The model is changing. You know, before these corporations and organizations used to get millions of clicks, you know, people used to buy their newspaper, and they've seen that dwindle away. And despite what people may think, neither Konstantin or I likes looking at the BBC and seeing what it's become. I actually find it heartbreaking to compare the corporation of my childhood that I used to love and adore, whether it was its broadcasting, the news, the sports, the comedy. The comedy was
magnificent.
Fabulous. I used to love it. I remember being so excited when the BBC said they were going to release a new sitcom. And now, I know that if the BBC releases a new sitcom, well, number one, they don't make comedy anymore. And number two, if they're going to release it, it's going to be like comparing a beautiful golden retriever to something like the three-legged dog you might find on the streets. There's no love for me.
I'll give you this example. When I did my first Edinburgh show, which is an hour show, I had a consultation with like a comedy coach. Because I won a competition for comedians, and the prize was you get to go to this super good comedy coach and they'll help you to write a better show. So I won the prize, I went to this person. And I said, I want to make my show about freedom of speech. I had this incident in my career where I was asked to perform at a comedy, I was asked to perform at a university and do comedy there. And they sent me a long list of things I can't joke about.
You were supposed not to joke about
yes,
certain things.
Lots of things.
Like, for instance,
racism, sexism, classism, ageism, ableism, homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, anti-religion, anti-atheism. And that contract also said that all jokes must be respectful and kind.
Okay, that doesn't leave much to laugh about.
Correct. So I turned it down, it became a big news story, and I said to this comedy coach, this is what I want to talk about in my show. And that person said to me, you can't do that because if you do that, UKIP voters will come and see your show. And I said, what's wrong with, why is that? Because I didn't know much about, I was like, are those people worse than other people? And that was basically the implication. Yeah. Yes, you're right. Spectator, Telegraph, GB News exist. We have a lot of issues with some of the things that we see on those publications too. We are people in the center who are trying to find the truth, not pursue a conservative agenda or a liberal agenda. We are interested in finding out what the truth is, and sometimes the truth is conservative and sometimes it's not.
That's interesting because, you know, when I monitored your show and watched a couple of your episodes, what sprang to my mind was that you are not a group. There's only two of you. And groupthink, of course, may be a problem within institutions. And what you have described is, of course, one ideology, the woke ideology. But leaving that aside for a moment, I mean, I'm always wondering why not more journalists would find it interesting to challenge this ideology. And there, I think we come to an interesting point, because we might have to talk a bit about groupthink. And I mean, Jordan Peterson famously once said that in order to find the truth, you have to be ready to offend someone. And but I think in journalism the problem might start even earlier, which is, you know, in order to look for the truth, you have to be ready to renounce on the love of your collective. So you have to be able to speak out against your group. Now, the two of you, you're obviously not a big group, and you might agree on many things. So it might not be a coincidence that it's just the two of you who have experienced the downsides of groupthink coming up with this business here.
I think it's a very good point, actually, that, you know, that they don't look. When I was growing up, I toyed with the idea of becoming a journalist. My favourite authors were Tom Wolfe, a former journalist, George Orwell, former journalist, Truman Capote, former journalist, and Hunter S. Thompson. And I, through reading their work, now obviously everyone apart from Orwell was American, but I had this idea of the intrepid reporter, you know, the idea that, you know, that Hollywood sold us, of the, you know, the intrepid reporter going against the grain, doing what was right in order to get the story, to break the particular, whoever it was.
Fiction.
Fiction, exactly.
Well,
and that's I'm kidding.
Yeah, but that you see is a fiction, because that's what I thought journalists were. I thought that was a role of journalism. Now, from what I see and what I've been exposed to, I see the role of journalism is very different. And actually this romanticized notion that I had of journalists and journalism simply doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And also as well, it's romantic because it's not real. It's not real.
I think you're being a bit harsh there.
No, but of course, there are a couple of people like that. Of course there are.
There are journalists risking their lives.
Of course, and I agree. But I also think there's a lot of other journalists who don't. And the reason why I mention all those names and we all go, oh, I know those names and they're brilliant, is because they are exceptional. And because they're exceptional, that means they're part of a small group. It takes real courage, real bravery, the ability to sacrifice everything in order to become exceptional.
That might be true, but you can be a good journalist without risking everything. I mean, we have a lot of good journalists out there who risk their reputation in a daily life by digging up stories that people in government might not like. I mean, these people are there still.
And those people are to be commended and celebrated. Sadly, it's a question of what does the public see, right? What does the public see? When I open the pages of The Guardian, do I see what you're talking about, or do I see what Francis is talking about, right? Do I see a ethnically ambiguous 25-year-old graduate of some woke college telling me that this country is racist, spouting ideology instead of looking at reality? And that's why, I mean, this isn't, you got to understand, neither of us hates journalists, we don't. I think the mainstream, by the way, in our conversation about new media, old media, I think the legacy media is incredibly important. Francis and I, what we do is edutainment. It's entertaining and it's educational, right? There are certain things that cannot be done in this way. Him and I are not going to go and dig through some corporate archive and find out that a company is not fixing a sewage leak even though they should be. That's not our job. Mainstream media is very, very important, and the criticisms that we have, they're not from a perspective of, you know, wanting to make no one believe the media or whatever. The issue is that the media, a lot of it, has not been doing a good job of adhering to its own values, the declared values of those institutions. That's the issue.
You know, if you think about, there's a clip that went viral where Stephen Colbert was interviewing one of the
CNN
journalists. And
CNN journalist thought he made a joke.
Yes. Yeah. And well, the audience, not the CNN, the audience thought
he said, "You guys at CNN are objective and balanced," and the audience, Stephen Colbert's audience. This is not a random audience. This is people who listen to Stephen Colbert. So it's a very particular worldview.
It was a telling moment, yes.
Yeah, they all laughed. Right. That's not because me and Francis made that happen. That's because that's what people think.
Right. Right. Yeah. But maybe established media has this problem with credibility, not because they are doing such a bad job. I mean, I'm not here to defend the BBC, but I've only been here for half a year to the UK now. I mean, you know, but I've been through this election campaign, and I thought, by and large, during the election campaign, the BBC did a pretty good job in giving all parties their voice, their space.
They did.
Now, at the same time, what I found that when it came to issues like gender or the conflict in Gaza, I found the BBC to be a bit lacking in diversity. I found the reporting, and still find it, of the Gaza conflict to be quite emotional. So this is why I come to mistrust the BBC a little bit, because, you know, I see the shortcomings. I do see the benefits of it, but I think the shortcomings are the stuff that actually diminish trust in institutions. Now, I want to press you again. Why do you think this is? You said it's ideology. You say it's anxiety. You say it's groupthink. But what made the BBC such a better institution when you were young?
What made it?
I don't know that it was better. That's the thing. I think there's a very real possibility that many of the same biases existed, but there was no alternative.
I think also as well, to give them their due, there is a fundamental disconnect between the people who get employed at the BBC, the people who work at the BBC, and the rest of the country. They're university educated, they're graduates, a lot of them come from a certain strata of society. And as a result of that, they don't understand that, look, how can I put this? If you grow up in London, in a very nice part of London, or a very nice part of this country, your life is completely different than if you grow up a son of a one-parent household in a council flat in Middlesbrough.
I'm from a small town.
Yeah.
My parents were both teachers. Somehow I was propelled into this, cosmopolitan world of anywheres, living in North London.
Yeah.
Okay, but I still take a huge interest in what's happening in North England. I went to Liverpool the other day trying to find out what were the underlying causes beneath the riots. And it's very, very interesting to learn about. Well, I found that there is very much left behind white working class, especially in the communities where the rioting happened and the library was set ablaze. And I learned that a lot of people who were actually affected by the violence, like a shopkeeper who got looted, a guy from Yemen who arrived here 25 years ago, he told me that those guys, the kids, they weren't racists. They just used the opportunity to ransack and plunder and that. And I think the root causes behind this are much more complex. And I find some joy in exploring this. I think that's what journalism is all about. But if you stick to your bubble in London, of course, you won't be able to see this. Yes. But let me hold this against you two, if I may. In a way, you are criticizing luxury beliefs. This is what we're talking about, right? Luxury beliefs from a very luxury environment. I mean, you don't have to do full coverage of political events around the globe. You can be happy with producing or being the conferencier for intellectual elite on a global level, which is brilliant. And at the same time, I mean, don't you feel some pity for journalists who have to work in the coal mines of journalism every day, produce online content, view world news, make it digestible for a broad public. That's a completely different line of work, and most people there don't earn very well.
Well, I feel pity for them not earning a lot of money, but what I would say is, for example, we were talking about the BBC earlier and its coverage of the election. If you ask me and Francis, are the BBC, broadly speaking, in their news coverage fair about UK politics? In their news coverage, broadly speaking, they are. However, when there are 50-50 calls, or when there are controversies, or when there are issues that are outside of the Overton window of the dinner parties to which these people go, that's where they always end up on the same side. So when it comes to news, many publications are pretty balanced. When it comes to opinion, that is completely not the case. And we are, to a large extent, opinion journalists. We give our opinions about things, and we try to do so in a fair and balanced way. So we're not criticizing the BBC's coverage of the elections. They're, broadly speaking, fairly reasonable. We're criticizing a lot of mainstream media opinion giving on things, and that is a fair comparison to us. So I'm happy to be held to the same standards that we hold the BBC to.
Yeah, right. I mean, looking back, when public TV and radio were first invented,
yes,
I mean, there was this anxiety that if it isn't regulated, this new mass media, it might fall into the wrong hands. Demagogues might use it to bring their message across and influence people.
Hey, my mother's Venezuelan. I've seen that with Chavez. Chavez took over every single TV channel when he did his Hello Presidente slots.
We saw it with another guy in Germany.
Diplomatically put.
Yes. But let me ask you this, where are we today? I mean, TV, radio is not the mass media of the 21st century. Internet is. Twitter is. YouTube is. What does that mean for journalism? It's a broad question, I know. But where are we going?
Well, what you're seeing, so we talked about integrity with the old media. I think we're going to see a challenge of integrity with the new media. because, and this goes for all organizations, left, right and center, they are going to face a very real challenge, which is you either play to the base, give people exactly what they want, what your audience wants, which you know that they want, whatever it may be, or are you actually going to have integrity and challenge your audience and push back and disagree with them and potentially lose revenue, you lose subscribers? That, I think, is going to be the real question moving forward. Who are going to be the people who are actually invested in creating quality journalism, quality content, and who are those merely interested in propagating a narrative and have no interest whether, you know, and have no interest in actually challenging said narrative?
And we've done that repeatedly ourselves. We have deliberately alienated portions of people who used to watch our show over issues of principle. Yeah. Because we care more about the principle. And we've always said this, we would much rather have 1 million subscribers and never grow again than have 10 million subscribers because we keep lying. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of which you're, I think, hinting at, and you're entirely right, is where we are is governments in countries that do not have free speech protections like the United States are going to attempt to crack down on the freedom that we now enjoy. It's already happening. I understand why. The internet is very powerful and it does allow bad actors to lead people in the wrong direction. My concern about the restrictions around that is historical. I mean, I don't know how you personally feel about the American Revolution. I broadly think it was a good idea. I'm glad that it happened. I'm glad that the world is where it is today.
We're on the same page there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you think about the American Revolution, if we had had the attempts at censorship to prevent violence and prevent disorder and prevent misinformation that we are increasingly going to see now, the American Revolution never would have happened. Because all the people who were printing the leaflets and the pamphlets about freedom and liberty and etc., they would have been called whatever people are going to be called now, right? So,
there's a major difference between, you know, a struggle for democracy and a struggle in democracy. So, I mean, to deploy violence to do away with a dictator or absolutists, I mean, that's a fair thing to do. Well, not so much with violence within a democracy.
No, well, look, no one's advocating violence within a democracy. What I'm saying is there are certain situations in which, historically speaking, people have used the freedom to speak to generate a sentiment to go and fight for what they believe against something that they despise and hate, right? So the idea that we must keep everything suppressed in order that there's never anyone having the wrong opinion that might make somebody violent just doesn't seem an accurate reflection to me of the human story. Yeah? That doesn't mean that I think violence is good. I don't.
But who wants to suppress everything?
Well, we see that Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary of this country, has just announced that misogyny is going to be treated like terrorism.
Extreme misogyny.
Extreme misogyny.
Yeah.
Right. Like terrorism. Is that reasonable? Is that sensible? Is being rude about a woman terrorism?
Of course not. No.
So that is
no.
So that's
polite.
government.
We shouldn't do it, but it's part of free speech, of course. But
right.
I mean, I think.
But that's not what's happening, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think
comedians are being investigated by the police for jokes they make in their shows,
and that worries me. That worries
me.
Right.
So when we're talking about the creep towards authoritarianism, if the narrative is the internet is making us all unsafe from bad actors, partly true, by the way, definitely true. There are bad actors who are causing bad things to be happening and to be thought by people, etc. We need more safety. It will inevitably lead to more authoritarian censorship.
And it will also lead to a chilling of speech, because as we all know, in order to actually solve a problem, you need to talk about it honestly. And that means talking about every single facet of that problem. And when you tell people that they can't speak, they start to get very upset and they get very angry. and resentment starts to build. And we've seen that time and time again in numerous different societies. And eventually what you do see is violence, because you can only repress that for so long before something happens, like an event that triggers something. And before you know it, we've got an uprising.
Right. I think that's very much what is behind this anxiety that if we don't crack down on certain forms of speech, we will see violence. I mean, up till today, I think we all could agree that there have to be limits to free speech, but those limits can only set in when legal interests that are of higher value than the opinion itself are threatened, like your property is threatened, or the security of your family is threatened by somebody who says, let's put their house ablaze. I mean, that's not free speech, of course, to say that. And my impression is that the threshold of the legal interests that need to be protected has been lowered to a level where emotions have to be protected. But this might all happen with the idea to just make this society more peaceful, so with the best of intentions.
Yes, of course.
And I guess it must be especially frightening to someone who knows the Soviet Union.
Yeah, if we lock everyone up, society will be a lot more peaceful.
Well, you're putting it to an extreme, but yeah.
But that's, I'm just taking your argument to its logical conclusion. But that's the point, right? The freedom has negative trade-offs. When people are free, they may not do what you want, right? And when people are unfree, I mean, I keep making this point to people. We all think that murder is wrong, right? We could eliminate all murder in society outside of the prison system. All you have to do is lock up every man between 16 and 40 or 50. And then there'd be no murder, pretty much, right? But we don't do that because we recognize that freedom is also important. The same is true of speech, and I agree with you, the threshold for what's considered an imprisonable offense. I mean, in the context of these riots, a guy has gone away for, I think, the best part of 3 years for chanting, "Who the fuck is Allah?" to police officers.
Yeah.
Why is that?
I haven't looked into that case. I'd like to do it.
Yeah.
Actually,
well, I think he was at the front.
Convictions or whatever.
I don't believe he had any previous convictions. But even if he did, I don't understand why, unless we have blasphemy laws that I'm not aware of, I don't understand why that is an imprisonable offense.
No, no. But I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk and the role he has played in the UK recently here. I mean, he has been blamed by a couple of people for being essentially behind the riots. At the same time, I'd like to come to this in a second. He has done this interview with Donald Trump. But let us stick to the riots first. Do you believe that this violence that we have seen on the streets of Britain, that this would have happened without social media influence?
Well, look, number one, we don't. There's no way there's fully able to answer that question because you would have to take part in a huge social experiment. We don't know. One thing that I will say is that that isn't the first time we've had riots in this country about certain issues. And also as well, I think it's not to say that you're putting forward the argument, but I think the people who put forward the argument are actually quite disingenuous because what they're actually doing is they're trying to apportion the blame for everything that happened on those days to Elon Musk's door. When the reality is, if everything was hunky-dory in this country, people wouldn't have behaved in that fashion. And what a lot of politicians are actually doing is they're pointing the finger at Musk to avoid people looking at them and thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, we in this country for many, many, many years, we even took a referendum on it. The reality is the Brexit referendum, in my opinion, was never really a referendum about the EU. The more I've looked into it, it was a referendum about lowering immigration. People have vocalised consistently they want immigration to be lowered. They have said it time after time after time. This has not happened. It has gone up. The government has consistently ignored people. And as a result of that, demonized them as well. And as a result of that, people have got very, very angry. Then there have been the issue of the grooming gangs, which was allowed to continue, which was allowed to fester because of political correctness. People didn't want to be seen to be racist, to crack down on it. That's both members of parliament and the police. And people are rightly very, very angry about it, to the point where it has now become a simmering cauldron of resentment. And all that needed was an event to happen which was going to trigger it, and the event was the horrific murder of those 3 little girls in Southport. Now, there were other events that conspired, but let's not pretend that that is a fault of Elon Musk. Let's actually be adults about it, and let's look at this situation objectively and honestly. And that's always what I come back to. And there are people in the mainstream media who talk about this honestly and do very good work. But there's also a lot of people in the mainstream media and in the political classes who don't want to have the conversation because it's uncomfortable and it's politically dangerous for them.
What Elon Musk has done is created a platform. Yes, some people say terrible things on there, and I am the target of some of those things. But it's a place where you can actually talk openly about the things that are happening in this country. And the reason politicians and the media are going after him is the same reason that my friend's patient reported him to the authorities. Because you're not supposed to say the truth. You're supposed to pretend, just like they have been, that there is no problem. That's why.
Okay, let me try a qualified explanation or variation of what you just said. You know, I'm a big fan of John Stuart Mill, a classic liberal, and he said that it is not sufficient to have an uninhibited market of ideas. It is necessary for a healthy and free society to have an uninhibited market of ideas, but it's not sufficient. You need some rules there. So, and I think what we might be seeing in the age of global media, global internet media, is 2 cultures clashing. I mean, you have the American tradition, you alluded to it earlier, with a more robust tradition of free speech. And then you have the European approach with a very different recent history in particular. I mean, me coming from Germany, I don't have to tell you what I'm talking about. But I mean, I think the ambition to regulate more on free speech in Europe is certainly greater than in America, bigger than in America. Now, maybe the real challenge that we are heading into is how to reconcile those 2 cultures. You know, will Elon Musk, you know, to take him as a personified free speech symbol, will he give in to the demands of Europe to do a bit more about misinformation? And at the same time, will the Europeans understand that they will have to acknowledge that they might not have the best tradition of free speech compared to the US? So might this be the clash that we are heading into?
I think what's very interesting, which underpins all of this, is if you look at a lot of the major political parties who are actually advocating for restriction of free speech, none of them are in a particularly healthy position politically. If you look at the approval rates for Labour at the moment, they're through the floor. If you look at the actual number of people that voted for Labour in this country, it's very low. You look at a lot of the non-popular...
Let's just explain this to our foreign audience. I mean, you had a landslide Labour victory in this country. About 2/3 of the parliamentary seats went to Labour. At the same time, the popular vote for Labour was about 1/3 of the constituents.
Yes, so the people actually taking part and people actually voting for them was significantly low. It's just of the people that voted, they got a high percentage of the vote. You then look at what's happening across Europe with a lot of these parties, and they're getting elected, but they're not winning huge majorities, they're scraping in. So I think a lot of it is that they want to control the narrative. They have identified the bogeyman of misinformation, because again, it helps to explain why power is slipping through their grasp. And the reason why power is slipping through their grasp is not misinformation, it's not populism, it's the fact that they are not doing what the people want them to do.
Okay, but if you read Elon Musk's post like civil war is inevitable in Britain, aren't you concerned?
Well, I'm concerned that civil war is inevitable, yeah.
You're not concerned about Elon Musk with 13 million followers putting out an idea like this?
But we both think he's right.
You think he's right, yeah?
If we continue to do what we're doing, of course it's inevitable.
Well, if does mean that it's not inevitable because you can just condition it.
No, but he's been saying this for a long time.
Yeah.
He's been saying there are countries in Europe that are heading down their own track. And if they carry on doing this, this will cause civil strife, civil conflict. Civil war is like, you can debate the exact language. I think it's imprecise. I think
You're talking about self-fulfilling prophecy to a certain extent.
No, it's not about self-fulfilling prophecy. What he's saying is, look, there's a cliff over there. If we keep driving in that direction, we're going to fall off a cliff.
So it's not inevitable that you fall off the cliff.
It is if we have 1997 to 2010, 13 years of a Labour government, mass immigration, uncontrolled mass immigration. Then you have 2010 to 2024, 14 years of a Conservative government, uncontrolled mass immigration, and coupled with, they were much worse than the Labour government, believe it or not, on dealing with foreign criminals, deporting people, keeping the borders closed, etc. So we have had 13 plus 24, 27 years, Jochen, non-stop mass immigration.
Absolutely.
Then you have this Labour government
Right.
that is only going to make it worse. We don't know how long that government is going to be in power.
Okay, because we're talking about two different things.
We're not. We're talking about the same thing.
Because of course there are problems with mass immigration. Nobody's denying this.
Okay.
But you can spell out the problems and address them without propagating that this country is on its way to civil war.
But what if you think it is on its way to civil war? What should you say then?
Well, if I believe it was, I would say it, but I don't think so.
Well, but what if Elon Musk does think so?
With such a followership, with such power comes responsibility.
Of course.
Yeah.
And
But don't you think that if we are about to drive off a cliff, it is absolutely your responsibility to shout as loudly as you can
Absolutely.
that we're heading in the wrong direction?
Absolutely.
So is it possible that that's what he's doing?
Yeah, but if I was in that car, I would not say, we are falling off this cliff, it's inevitable. I would say, step on the brakes, try to steer this car in a different direction.
Perfect.
Stay calm.
Perfect. Now,
address all the problems that we might have with the brakes.
Imagine that you're driving in this car for 30 years and you keep saying, I think that over there is a cliff, we maybe shouldn't drive off it. And the person next to you goes, racist. You go, no, guys, I'm just saying, if we keep driving in this direction, bigot. Guys, I'm just xenophobe, right? Grooming guys, no, you can't talk about that. What if that happens for 30 years, non-stop? And then eventually you go, no one in this car is listening to me.
But it doesn't go like this for 30 years. I mean, the success of your show proves that it doesn't. I mean,
our show is nothing.
No, well,
our show is nothing in the grand scheme of things. We represent a tiny sliver of people in this country.
I don't think so, no.
Hold on. You got to let me finish the point. We represent a tiny sliver of people in this country. I didn't finish the line. Who have influence. Very, very small number of people. And those people that do listen to us who are in parliament, or those who listen to us who are in the media, or those who listen to us who are in corporations, they keep their mouths shut. Most of them. Even those that agree with us. Even those that are cabinet ministers. I had dinner with a cabinet minister from the last government while they were in power. He agrees with everything we say, and they did nothing. Right? So the point is, we still have, look at the facts on the ground. We still have uncontrolled mass immigration. Yes or no? Yes, we do. We still have uncontrolled illegal immigration. Yes or no? Yes, we do. We still have ethnic tensions, partly because we're not encouraging people to integrate. We're not breaking up ghettos. We're not encouraging people to learn English. We're not encouraging people to think of themselves as British as opposed to white or black or Muslim or Jewish or whatever, right? We're not creating a cohesive society because of ideological reasons. And what Elon Musk is saying is, if you don't have an overarching identity and you don't encourage people to integrate and you bring in more and more people from a culture that's different to yours, you're going to see, particularly in a country with a stagnant economy, tension and violence. And over time, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. That's what he's warning about.
What I'm just saying is that civil war isn't inevitable.
If
you might
we
have
keep
a
doing
change
this,
of,
it is.
You might have a change of government in 5 years' time. Maybe not this time around, but maybe in 5 years. Will take some more time. All right. You might have a change of mindset in the broader public. You might even have a change of mindset with many immigrants who came here themselves. They may vote.
Okay, let's try again. Let's try this again.
Okay.
Let's say we're sitting in Germany. I'm not saying we are, but let's say we're sitting in Germany in the 1930s. And we say authoritarianism and tyranny and mass murder are inevitable. And you say to me, no, Konstantin, stay calm. Let's not create a self-fulfilling prophecy. Let's just make sure that we're being reasonable and calm. There could be a change of government.
The German democracy back then was one of the youngest democracies in history. We are sitting here in one of the oldest democracies in history. Do you really have so little trust in British deliberation and ability to change?
You say that we have a democracy, and I agree we do. But somebody would go, well, we don't, because I voted to politicians to represent me, to lower immigration, which they have stated time.
In 2010, 2015,
and
2016,
again,
2017,
it is frustrating.
2019.
It is frustrating.
But my point is something deeper. Is that a democracy? If you have politicians come to power, promise to do something, time after time after time, ignore the wishes of the voter, and not only that, exacerbate the problem, is that really democracy? You have got, and you may not want to know this, but if you think you don't like what we're saying, the kids who are younger, they're openly now, Gen Z are openly talking about what's the point in democracy.
Right. You know, one of the first stories I did here, I went to Tower Hamlets in the East End, and I looked what effects mass immigration had on social housing there. And I heard horrendous stories from people, a family of 4 living on 30 square meters. Yeah. Imagine that during COVID. Ooh. So, I mean, the problems are palpable. I mean, there's no question about this. But I'll tell you another story as well, which makes me hopeful about Britain. I went up to Liverpool, I told you the other day, after the riots, and I met up with an imam whose mosque actually got beleaguered by 50-odd protesters who were screaming things like, enough is enough. Yeah. We don't want you here. Muslims, get out. Now this imam, he quite bravely, he went out there, offered those guys burgers and chips, and eventually started talking to them. And at one stage, he even hugged one of the protesters. And why? Because he told me later on, we spoke for an hour or so, and it was moving. He told me that because the protester, he said that this was the first time for a long time that somebody had actually listened to him. And he had his voice heard. And you know, this experience alone made this man so grateful that he hugged this imam, who a couple of minutes earlier he wanted to get out of the country. And that goes to show that if you have a closer look, there might be common problems that, you know, immigrants that are here already and the local population, the white working class, have in common. You just have to explore them, to see them. And this might bring about policy change.
But here's the question though. Would you say that the government response in this country to the protests and the riots has been to do what the imam did?
No.
And that's why people think civil war is inevitable.
Well, I don't tend to think so.
I'm not saying you have to think that. I'm just saying...
Yeah, sure. But
my point to you, you asked us about Elon Musk. My point to you is, if this is what he sees, he is totally right to warn people that we're heading in the wrong direction.
How much does he know about Britain?
I don't know. You'd have to ask him.
Right. Okay. We'll do that later. So okay. I'll try that, of course. But no, I wanted to talk to you also about the interview that he had with Donald Trump, because I think that's a kind of a watershed moment, maybe for journalism and all the things we've been talking about here. Would you say that this was journalism?
I didn't really listen to a lot of it. I listened to excerpts. I didn't listen to it all the way through. So I don't really have an opinion on it, I'll be honest with you. But look, I think it speaks to something broader, which is every time that I see Trump interviewed, it always feels like, unless it's by new media, it feels like an attack dog kind of trying to misrepresent, trying to attack. I think there's just, people want to be allowed to make up their own minds. I think the reason that these interviews have captured the zeitgeist is because people don't trust the former institutions to be able to interview Trump as he should be interviewed. Hard, but fair.
Like Francis said, challenge is great. Like we're having it back and forth. I love this.
Yeah.
Right. This is exactly how these conversations should be had. And the reason people are often frustrated with mainstream media is that it often doesn't happen. It's not shown in this way, right? Kathy Newman and Jordan Peterson was kind of the very good example of this, right? So I didn't listen to the I sort of feel like I've heard everything Donald Trump has to say at this point. Yeah. Or, you know.
But the reason I'm asking you about this interview is that at the beginning, and I only listened to it for an hour or so before it got really boring, I believe. But at the start of it, Elon Musk said that in adversarial interviews, nobody is themselves. So what he wanted to have with Donald Trump was a conversation, as he dubbed it. You know, and conversations are also what you call your encounters. Well, it's not interviews, I guess. So what I want to ask you about is, do you challenge your hosts enough?
It depends. So the way I can tell you exactly the way we do things when we are having a conversation, which you just observed. If we agree with you, we will say it. If we don't agree with you, we will say it.
Yeah, maybe you agree too much with your guests.
Well, yes, that's very possible. But then again, you know, when we had Aram Bastani from the left-wing organization Novara Media, we agreed on many things as well, right? If we don't agree, we often don't agree with each other. I mean, an interview we just released with Alex Phillips, at the end, it's me and Francis, like me agreeing with Alex and him saying, you're both wrong.
Yeah.
Right? So the only time that doesn't happen is we have a time limit on our interviews. And there have been times when somebody has said something we don't agree, and we haven't challenged it because we didn't have time.
But let me challenge you then again.
Okay, yeah,
please.
perfect. Go for it.
The interview you had with Nigel Farage.
Yes.
Lately.
Which one? The latest one.
Latest one.
Okay.
The latest one. One gets the impression that you like him. That's all right. I mean, you can have an honest conversation with people you like. No problem about this. Yeah. But we are talking about a politician here who just managed to get into the House of Commons with 4 parliamentarians, who has a very, very strict agenda, bringing down immigration to net zero figures. Now,
which neither of us agrees with, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay, but I actually missed a couple of points in your conversation with him. Like, how does he want to do this? You know, bring net immigration down to net zero. He also said he wanted to change the electoral system of Britain. Is that a good idea? You didn't ask him about it.
We've talked with Nigel about PR, proportional representation, in previous interviews. Yeah. So he's been on the show 4 times. We've always given, like for example, Nigel and I disagree very strongly about Ukraine. And when the invasion of Ukraine happened, he was on the show just before, as it was about to happen. There's 10 minutes of him and I going back and forth.
He said something along the lines that the war was inevitable, right?
I don't...
Well, he said that the West provoked Putin.
Yes. And we had a strong argument about that because I disagree with him. But if he said, if you jump out of the window, you're going to break your legs, it's inevitable, I would say, you're right, Nigel. Do you see what I mean? Right. So the issue is that, the point I'm trying to make to you is, we don't challenge people in order to challenge people. We challenge people if they say something that we don't agree with them on. And if they don't, then we don't. Right. As for Nigel Farage, he's a very likable person.
Right, but I mean, journalism means that you scrutinize people.
We're not journalists.
Whether you like their views or not.
We never signed up to being journalists.
But still you said that...
We host conversations.
Yes, but there was a market niche for you, and there was a certain frustration about established media that made you enter this business in the first place. Yeah. So you want to do better, I guess.
We don't want to be better journalists. Okay. We're doing something different.
Okay.
We're doing something different.
And how far does your business differ from journalism then?
Well, I told you, our business is edutainment, right? We're having informative but funny, interesting conversations with people. We can't do what the BBC does. That's why I said, if you remember earlier, the mainstream media is very important and is necessary, right? But it doesn't mean that 2 guys who used to be comedians, one of them still is, are going to replace the BBC. That's not going to happen.
Sure.
Sorry, Francis.
No, and it's also as well, I think when you have a conversation actually with someone, you of course challenge, but also what you do as well is you let them speak. And what the person will actually see is a truer and fuller representation of that person than somebody continuing to challenge them. So I'll give you an example. There are some times where I'm watching the mainstream media and I'm seeing challenge after challenge after challenge after challenge, particularly with people that they find reprehensible. And I'm looking at them going, this is actually just a glorified virtue signal. Because what you were signaling to the viewer is I find this person reprehensible, therefore I'm not going to let them talk, and therefore I'm going to trip them up.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it's actually and this is why Joe Rogan has been so popular, is because he talks to people and then you get to see a fuller version of that person.
Right, right. But Francis, I think you made a very interesting point about tripping up politicians.
Yeah.
And if I monitor myself, I also get tired of this, you know,
yes.
seeing journalists just desperately trying to make their point and show how intellectually superior they are to certain politicians instead of exploring ideas.
Yeah.
But, you know, and you are certainly, your show has been designed to be a kind of antidote to woke, right? And to an ideology which wants to virtue signal all the time. But don't you see the danger that the pendulum might swing in the other direction now? I mean,
we've been warning about it for a long time.
Yeah.
We've said from day one that the reason we are concerned about the issues that we're concerned about is not only that we are concerned about society moving too far to the left, it's also because we're very concerned about society moving too far to the right. And we've been making that point from the day we started. So we are absolutely in favor of making sure that there's a sensible middle of society. The 85–90% of people who just want to get on with their lives, their voices are heard, and the extremes are not able to drive the agenda because the media and the political class ignore the voices of the majority of the people in this country who are perfectly reasonable, who are perfectly decent, who are not bigoted, who are not prejudiced, who just want to have their views reflected in government policy, and it hasn't been for decades.
And also as well, if you encourage people to look at themselves through the prism of race and gender, that's a very, very dangerous way to approach society. Because the last thing, and I don't need to explain it to a German person, is you don't want white men who are in the majority going, we're going to see ourselves through this prism, because that's only going to end one way and it's not going to be pleasant.
But it's happening.
Yes. But it's happening. And you can see it. And I know people I like, and they're starting to talk in that way as well.
Yeah.
And they're talking about representing these people. I'm like, oh, hang on a second here. This is not going to end well.
And those people were also out on the streets of Britain during the riots, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why we've been warning about identity politics from the beginning. Because yes, identity politics for minorities is bad. Identity politics for majorities, really fucking bad.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Gentlemen, I've been keeping you for quite some time. One last question, and it may sound familiar to you. What's the one thing we are not talking about as a society that we really should be?
The importance of truth.
The amount of children who have disappeared off the school registers after COVID. Huge amount of kids. And now and these are young kids as well. 10, 11, 12 years old who no longer go to school anymore. Nobody knows where they are.
Gentlemen, thanks very much for this conversation or even interview.
Thank you.
Great.
That was great.
Thank you very much.